What's up, everybody? It's Rom and Robbie back with another tier list video. This time I'm going to be taking a look at every Browns head coach since 1999, including interim head coaches, so this list isn't so short. So let's not waste any more time and get started. Alright, first up is Chris Palmer. Now, Chris Palmer was obviously the first head coach when the Browns came back in 1999. Before that, he was the offensive coordinator with the Jaguars. Comes to Cleveland, last 2 seasons as the head coach, and it was a rocky stay to say the least. Overall record was 5-27. First year 2-14, second year 3-13. So it would be very easy to put Chris Palmer in the F tier. But here's why I'm not going to do that. There's 2 things to consider. One, in those days, the Browns were just a hopeless expansion team, so nobody thought they were going to be any good. And I don't know many head coaches that would have came in and really shook things up. And number 2, Chris Palmer's record against the Steelers was 2-2. And, similar to how Ohio State head coaches are judged by their record against Michigan, sometimes Browns head coaches are judged by their record against the Steelers, especially in those days because that's when the Browns-Steelers rivalry had more juice in it. So, because of those 2 things, I'm going to give Chris Palmer a big break here, and I'm going to put him in the D tier. So Chris Palmer gets a D. All right, up next is Butch Davis. Good old Butch Davis. When the Browns hired Butch in 2001, he was the hottest coach in the college ranks. So this was a pretty big hire at the time. And, he got to the Browns and he immediately made an impact. Their first year, they go from 3-13 to all the way to 7-9 in his first year. And, I think they started off 4-2 that year, and they were even 6-4, I believe. But they kind of fell apart towards the end and finished 7-9. And, it was weird. They had a ton of bizarre losses in 2001. There was that Bears game. There was Bottlegate. I know they lost on a last-second field goal more than once. So just a lot of bad breaks. And, had those things not happened, the Browns might have made the playoffs in 2001. So then, of course, in 2002, the Browns go 9-7 and make the playoffs. So at this point, people are probably thinking Butch Davis is the savior. And it was funny. In 2001, they got all the bad breaks, but in 2002, it seemed like they got all the good breaks because, there was the Hail Mary game against Jacksonville, the Titans comeback, the Al Lerner Jets game, and some other ones too. So really, it was kind of a magical season. Luckily, they got all the good breaks. But then, there's the playoff game in 2002 against Pittsburgh, and this is the first strike against Butch Davis because he is pretty much the reason they lost that game. Most people blame it on Dennis Northcutt for that drop at the end, and trust me, Northcutt deserves a ton of blame for that because that is just inexcusable. But Butch Davis is really the reason they lost that game. The Browns were up 24-7 at halftime, I want to say. I know they're up 24-7 at some point. I don't know if it was halftime, but Butch Davis, for whatever reason, decides to take both play calling duties away from his coordinators and goes into this stupid prevent defense in the second half. And the Browns slowly give up the lead, and they lost it, led at the very end. I think a minute left, the Steelers took the lead, and they lost that game. So just foolish, just extremely foolish. And Butch Davis is the reason they lost that game. People talk about Bill Callahan sabotaging the Super Bowl. It makes me wonder if Butch Davis sabotaged this game. Anyway, moving on to 2003, the Browns go 5-11. They regress big time, but it really isn't to be. It's not really much of a surprise. If you did your research, you would know that there was a big salary cap purge. The Browns cut a lot of salary heading into 2003. So they lost a lot of veterans, key veterans on defense. So 2003 was kind of like a mini rebuild because they still had, it wasn't a total rebuild because they still had a ton of players from that playoff team, but they lost a lot of key veterans and they were starting a lot of young guys on defense. So 2003 was kind of a mini rebuild. They go 5-11. Then in 2004, the Browns were just destroyed with injuries. And I know you can say that about a lot of seasons, but in 2004, it was no joke. They were just decimated. I think in the Cowboys game that they lost 6 starters or something crazy like that. Anyway, the Browns started off 3-8, and Butch Davis would resign after that 3-8 start. He called it quits. So Butch Davis's body of work, 7-9, 9-7, makes the playoffs, 5-11, 3-8, and quits. Let's look at my notes here. What do I want to say? So I'm tempted to put Butch Davis in the B tier here because whenever Cleveland.com or any Twitter poll asks like who's the best Browns head coach since '99, Butch Davis always wins. And he did lead us to the playoffs, even though he lost us that game. He did lead us to the playoffs, and he also put together back-to-back respectable seasons, which hasn't been done since '99, except for when Butch Davis did it. 7-9, 9-7. So because of those things, and I forgot, on opening day, Butch Davis had a pretty decent track record. He was 1-3, but when you consider the Browns' Week 1 record since '99 is like 1-19-1 or something horrid like that, that's pretty good. So Butch Davis has the only Week 1 win, and it was in 2004. And his 3 losses were all last-second field goals. Look it up. So, I mean, what that means, they competed in those games, and obviously they should have won the Dwayne Rudd game. So because of all of those things, Butch Davis is going to go in the B tier here. Okay, up next we have Terry Robiskie. Terry Robiskie was the interim head coach after Butch Davis. He was the interim for 5 games. He went 1-4, and it wasn't really his fault, but the Browns were just abysmal. I don't know, like I was talking about with Chris Palmer earlier, I don't know many head coaches that could have walked into that situation and done any good. Luke McCown was his quarterback, which is just a nightmare. But I'm gonna cut Terry some slack here. He did win the season finale in 2004, which snapped a 9-game losing streak at the time. He did win that one game, and like I said, I don't know many coaches that would have came in there and had much success. So Terry Robiskie is gonna get a break here. He's gonna go in the D tier. All right, moving on. Romeo Crennel. Now, Romeo Crennel was the Patriots defensive coordinator in the early 2000s when they won 3 Super Bowls in 4 years. So this was a pretty good hire at the time. His first year in 2005, the Browns go 6-10, but nothing wrong with that. It was just a pure rebuilding year, and they actually improved from 2004. But in 2006, the Browns go 4-12, so they regress. And it was weird. A lot of players on that team regressed as well, like kind of without explanation. So, and after that 2006 season, Romeo Crennel was put on the hot seat. He nearly lost his job. Comes back in 2007, and the Browns go 10-6, the magical 2007 season. Romeo gets a contract extension after that season. But then in 2008, when the Browns had huge expectations, I believe they had 5 nationally televised games that year. The Browns just laid an egg in 2008. They go 4-12, and Romeo Crennel is fired after 2008. But if you know me, I always cut Romeo slack for 2008. The Browns were just hit extremely hard with injuries in 2008. Braylon Edwards was just dropping passes left and right, many of which were game-changing passes. And also, 2008 could have been a learning experience for that team. Like if they would have came back in 2009, I think they would have came back a better team, but we'll never know, of course. So Romeo Crennel 6-10, 4-12, goes 10-6, but then another 4-12 season. I can't put him in the B tier because they never made the playoffs, and they never made the playoffs. And what am I trying to say here? And 2 4-12 seasons, but because of that 10-6 season, Romeo Crennel will at least get a C tier ranking here. Romeo Crennel, C tier. All right, up next, we got Eric Mangini. Eric Mangini was Browns owner Randy Lerner's first choice when he found out that Mangini was available. All the Cleveland media members have this story of interviewing Randy Lerner at the time, and then when he was made aware that Eric Mangini was available, his eyes just lit up, and he was dead set on hiring Eric Mangini. Why? I have no idea. So Mangini comes in, trades away all the playmakers, gets rid of all the talent, brings in all of his Jets players because he was previously the head coach with the Jets. And the Browns were just a disgrace in 2009. They started off 1-11, and during those first 12 games, I still say they were worse than the 0-16 Browns. Just an awful team. They did win 4 in a row at the end to finish 5-11. But you look at those teams they beat; those are pretty bad teams, other than the Steelers. And those teams are so one-dimensional. The Browns, all they could do was run the ball, and it's everybody knows towards the end of the season, players throw in the towel. What does that really prove? Winning 4 games at the end. Mike Holmgren is brought in as the Browns team president after 2009, and he shocks everybody by deciding to keep Eric Mangini. So Mangini gets another shot in 2010, but once again the Browns finish 5-11. It was a better 5-11, if that makes any sense. They were just a much better team, like personnel-wise, like Ben Watson, Peyton Hillis, Sheldon Brown, Joe Hayden, Scott Fujita, the list goes on. It was just a better team, but they still wound up being 5-11. But in 2010, that was when they had that little run where they beat the Saints, beat the Patriots, should have beat the Jets. So there's that thing. It would be easy to put Mangini in the F tier here, but there's 2 redeeming qualities about him. One, what I just talked about, that little run where they beat the Patriots and Saints. And 2, I respected Mangini's smarts, like when he was on the sidelines, not like in the front office. Like he was clueless as a front office executive. But as a head coach, he was a pretty smart dude, and he instilled discipline in his teams. I've heard Joe Thomas say somewhat recently that as the years have gone by, he's grateful for what Mangini taught him as a player. So, because of the smarts and the discipline, and because of that little run in 2010, Mangini's going to be a D tier. Eric Mangini is in the D tier. All right, up next we have Pat Shermer. Pat Shermer was Mike Holmgren's first hire as team president. First head coach he hired as team president. He was not his first choice. Mike Holmgren went after all the big names at first. He went after Jim Harbaugh, John Gruden, Bill Cowher, but they all turned him down. So he was kind of stuck with Pat Shermer. Pat Shermer was the offensive coordinator with the Rams in 2010, I believe. And has an abysmal stay as the head coach of the Cleveland Browns. 4-12 his first year, 5-11 his second year, and then gets fired after that. And, Pat Shermer made some of the worst in-game decisions I've ever seen. So it would be very easy to just put him in the F tier. But you got to consider this. Pat Shermer had arguably the rawest deal of any NFL head coach in NFL history. His first season, he doesn't have an offseason because of the NFL lockout in 2011. Then his second year, the Browns get sold in training camp. And that always means, like, the writing's on the wall. The head coach is going to get fired after the season because the new owner is going to want to come in and bring in his new GM and head coach. So, to be fair, Pat Shermer never really had a shot. So I gotta cut him some slack here. If it wasn't for that, I would put him in the F tier. But because he never really had a shot, Pat Shermer is going to be a D tier. He's getting a break. I give out a lot of breaks on these tier lists, if you haven't noticed. All right, up next, Rob Kazinsky. Rob Kazinsky was hired by the Joe Banner, Mike Lombardi regime. Kazinsky was actually the Browns' offensive coordinator in 2007 when they went 10-6. He would last 1 season in Cleveland as the head coach. It was a 4-12 season. He was fired after the season. It shocked everybody. But, he started off 3-2. It looked very promising. But then Brian Hoyer got hurt. So we'll never know what would have happened there. But the Browns still ended up being 4-5 through 9 games. So, first half of the season, things looked pretty decent for Rob Kazinsky. But then they would end the season losing 7 in a row. It was a complete nightmare of a second half of the season. So, man, I'm kind of struggling here. I don't know if he's a C or a D. Because, like I said, he only got 1 season, which isn't fair at all. And Brian Hoyer got hurt, so we'll never know what would have happened there. I truly believe Kazinsky still would have been the head coach. Or he would have got another season if Brian Hoyer didn't get hurt. Because I think the Browns would have at least been 7-9 that year. Where do I go here? Where do I go? D. Chud's a D because, well, this thing's not working here. There we go. Because they ended the season losing 7 in a row, which was just pitiful. And their defense blew a ton of leads in that 7-game losing streak. So, I mean, yeah, he didn't really have much of a shot, but Chud's got to be a D here. All right, up next, Mike Pettine. Mike Pettine was also hired by Banner and Lombardi, although those two would be out the window not too long after. Mike Pettine was, once again, not the Browns' first choice as head coach. I believe he was the 4th or 5th choice. They were kind of stuck with him. He was previously the defensive coordinator with the Bills. Anyways, head coach of the Browns in 2014, and his first year, the Browns started off 7-4. It was very refreshing. I remember thinking, Mike Pettine is the answer here. But, the Johnny Manziel circus caught up with Mike Pettine, and they ended 2014 on a 5-game losing streak to finish 7-9. Just a dumpster fire end of a season. Then in 2015, the Browns go 3-13. It's just another nightmare season. But it was weird. The 2015 Browns should not have been that bad. Like, they were definitely not a 3-13 team. I remember hearing Andrew Hawkins say that, and I totally agree with him. Because it was mostly the same team as 2014, but not the exact same team. Obviously, they lost some pieces like Miles Austin and other players I can't remember. And the first half of 2015 wasn't actually that bad. They were 2-3 at one point. They beat the Ravens on the road. And there were a ton of close games that they should have won that they lost. The Denver game, the San Diego game, the Arizona game. So had they won some of those games, I really believe 2015 could have turned out a lot differently. But it didn't. So Mike Pettine, 7-9 and 3-13 in 2 years. So, wasn't unforgivable, but wasn't anything to write home about. So Mike Pettine will be a D here. I feel like all these coaches are in the D tier. All right, up next we got Hugh Jackson. Hugh Jackson. It would be very easy to just say 3-36-1 and put him in the F tier, but that would be boring. So let's give some context here. Now, a lot of people forget when the Browns hired Hugh Jackson, he was the hottest coach on the market at the time. Like, if the Browns didn't hire him, he would have got hired by the New York Giants. But we were lucky. We thought it was a steal when we got him in 2016. But anyway, Hugh Jackson, first year, 1-15. Second year, 0-16. Just, if you would have told me that when he got hired, I just would have thought you were insane. Never saw that coming in a million years. But let's rewind a little bit. In 2016, the Browns should have started off 3-1, and this was the downfall of Hugh Jackson, if you ask me. The first game against the Philadelphia Eagles in 2016, the Browns are down 13-10 in the second half, so it's a closely contested game. But the Browns center snaps the ball over RG3's head, goes out of the back of the end zone. It's a safety, and that game just spiraled out of control after that. So, I'll be fair, giving the Browns a loss there in this hypothetical situation. But week 2, the Browns blow a 20-point lead against the Ravens. The Browns should have won that game. There is no excuse for blowing a 20-point lead in the NFL. So they should have won that game. Week 3, they should have beat the Dolphins, but Cody Parkey fucked them. He missed 3 kicks in that game, I believe, including the game-winning kick. So if he would have made that kick, the Browns would have won that game. And then the following week at Washington, the Browns were up 20-17 late in that game. Like, I want to say towards the end of the third quarter. And they're going in for another score that probably would have put the game away, 27-17. But Browns fullback Malcolm Johnson fumbles, turns it over. It was such a killer. And then later on, the famous Duke Johnson fumble happened. And the Browns lost that game. So, they should have started that season off 3-1, man. And I really think things would have turned out differently because, winning is contagious. And that was a young, developing team, very young team. And I think they could have grown from that. It would have gave them confidence, but it didn't happen. And, they ended up being 1-15 that year. Anyway, 2017 they go 0-16. 2018, Hugh Jackson is miraculously brought back as head coach after being 1-31 his first 2 years, and he actually gets some talent to work with. New GM John Dorsey brings in a lot of new talent, and it showed. Like the Browns were just a much improved team. They looked like a regular football team. However, they would start off 2-5-1 in 2018, and Hugh Jackson would be fired after the 8th game. Questionable decision at the time. I remember I was against firing him because they were 2-5-1, but they very easily could have been 5-2-1. They played a ton of overtime games that year. So I thought, why are you firing him? Like, we were 0-16 last year. We're 2-5-1. Like, it's not that bad. But obviously it turned out to be a great decision because they finished that season. They finished 2018 on a roll. So anyway, that was the long version, but Hugh Jackson, 336-1. It's got to be in the F tier. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Okay, up next is Greg Williams. He was the interim head coach after Hugh Jackson was fired, and Greg Williams went 5-3 as interim head coach. Very easily could have been 6-2 if they would have won that Ravens game in the season finale. Greg Williams just totally changed the culture overnight. The penalties disappeared, and just was phenomenal. 5-3 as head coach. That second half of the season in 2018 was the most fun. Arguably the most fun I've had as a Browns fan since I became a fan in 2004. So, no questions asked here. Greg Williams is an... Oh my God. Sorry about that, guys. Greg Williams is going to go in the A tier. Greg Williams is an A tier. Now, a lot of people wanted to bring him back as head coach in 2019. I admit I did not want to. I wanted to bring in an offensive-minded head coach for Baker, and just because that's just what the NFL is like nowadays. You're better off with offensive-minded head coaches. But obviously that turned out to be the wrong decision because, Freddie Kitchens was a disaster in 2019. Which leads me to my next head coach, Freddie Kitchens. Now, I'm going to scold my fellow Browns fans here because you all loved this hire at the time. I would say 95% of the Browns fan base loved hiring Freddie Kitchens at the time. I hated it. It didn't make any sense to me. And I took a ton of crap on Twitter for that. I remember saying, dude, we should hire Bruce Arians. He's begging for the job. He's a 2-time coach of the year, quarterback whisperer. And everybody's like, no, dude, Bruce Arians is so old. We can't let Freddie Kitchens walk away. It's like, dude, Freddie Kitchens had never been a head coach at any level, including high school. And he's only been a coordinator in the NFL for 8 games. Like, you're going to pass up Bruce Arians? Bruce Arians just could have made him his coach in waiting. But anyway, Freddie Kitchens is the head coach in 2019. Was just a disaster. No other way to put it. It was 6-10, and there's no excuse for going 6-10 with that kind of talent. One thing I will cut him a break on, if this is true, because I heard from somebody who kind of knows what they're talking about, that Freddie Kitchens wasn't allowed to hire his own coordinators. Like, I think John Dorsey and Jimmy Haslam hired his coordinators for him or something like that. And that would explain why he never hit it off with Todd Monken. So if that is true, then I would give Freddie Kitchens a break. But I can't confirm that. So by default, Freddie Kitchens has to be an F tier. I always felt terribly for the guy, but I mean, what can I do? Freddie Kitchens is an F. And last but not least, Kevin Stefanski. Now, obviously, Stefanski has not coached a game yet, so I can't rate him. But since I have no place to put him, I'm going to be a homer. I'm going to put him in the S tier because I truly believe he will turn into an S tier head coach. I'm speaking in generalities here, but he seems way too bright. He seems like a really bright guy. I think he's just going to make it work. Now, Hugh Jackson also seemed pretty bright, but Hugh Jackson had an ego. Kevin Stefanski does not have an ego, from what it seems like. So I just think he's going to make it work. He's too smart to not. The team is so talented. I think he's going to cater to his players. It seems like he already has the respect of his players. I was watching, Building the Browns, and it just seems like he has a commanding presence. So by default, I know I'm being an absurd homer here, but by default, Kevin Stefanski is going to be an S tier. And that's all we got here. Anyways, that's going to do it for this video. That is all Cleveland Browns head coaches and interim head coaches since 1999 being put through the tier list. This might be it for tier lists because I was pretty disappointed by the lack of views on the last one I did, and I imagine this one probably won't do that much better. So this might be it for tier lists unless one of the videos blows up, which I'm not expecting it to, because I'm kind of running out of ideas. I mean, like, what else would I do? Like Browns receivers since '99, Browns running backs. It just gets kind of lame at that point. So this very well might be it for tier lists. But anyway, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Please follow me on Twitter. Please consider supporting me on Patreon. And yeah, with all that said, I'm Ramen Robbie, and thanks for watching.